Story 1. Room 7 Protocol. The exposure should have taken less than a second. I had the portable detector centered, the tube head angled down, and my thumb on the switch when the patient on the bed finally turned toward me. I say patient because that was how the order had come through, but what looked back at me was not anyone I had wheeled into imaging before. The face on the pillow was mine. Not exactly as I knew it, but mine as it appeared in my badge photo 3 years earlier. Before the lines around my eyes, before the hospital started sealing doors and retiring room numbers. When the image processed, the chest on my screen contained 12 rib shadows, an identification badge where the heart should have been, and the outline of room 7 itself inside the lungs. I had worked overnight X-ray in Phoenix long enough to stop noticing most of what unsettled newer staff. Maricopa Valley County Trauma was the kind of hospital that never really slept. It only changed tone. During the day, it was loud in an organized way. Trauma activations, transport teams, family members at registration, residents walking too fast and pretending not to be frightened. At night, the building settled into a different rhythm. The fluorescent lights felt harsher. The hallways carried sound farther. You could hear telemetry alarms from 3 corridors over and tell which nurse was silencing them by the tempo of her shoes. That summer had been worse than usual. The city was under an extended heat emergency, the kind that pushed pavement temperatures high enough to soften shoe soles and sent a steady stream of dehydrated laborers, unhoused patients, and heat stroke cases through the emergency department. My shift started at 11 at night and ended at 7 in the morning, though in practice I rarely left on time. Imaging backed up after midnight when fewer transporters were available and every chest pain, fall, and motor vehicle trauma seemed to arrive at once. My job was straightforward on paper. I covered emergency department portables, after-hours inpatient exams, and the occasional operating room request when computed tomography was tied up, and someone needed a quick film to confirm line placement or an instrument count issue. I knew how to work around ventilators, chest tubes, cervical collars, and the controlled chaos of trauma bays. I knew which physicians ordered unnecessary repeats and which ones only called when the situation was truly deteriorating. Routine kept the work clean, position the patient, shield what could be shielded, column it tightly, confirm laterality, expose, process, move on. On my first night of that week, one of the senior emergency nurses, a woman named Dana Whitlock, stopped me near the clean utility room while I was swapping detector batteries. Dana had been in county trauma long enough that people lowered their voices around her without realizing they were doing it. "If a portable request prints for room 7 after midnight," she said, "you call the nursing supervisor and you do not go." She said it in the same tone she might have used to remind me about a missing consent form. No drama, no smile. I asked whether room 7 was part of the old emergency overflow wing. I had seen inconsistent numbering in the West Corridor before, the kind of thing that happened after repeated renovations. Dana capped her pen and slipped it into her scrub pocket. "It is not an active room." That wasn't my question. "It is after midnight that matters," she said. "If it prints before then, it is a system issue. If it prints after, do not process it." Then she walked away to answer a call light. I assumed it was one more piece of county hospital folklore. Every large institution collects rules with no official source. Never take the service elevator alone during storm warnings. Do not use the old stairwell between radiology and pathology because the door alarms fail. If the pneumatic tube jams twice in 1 hour, hand carry blood bank specimens. Most of those rules started with a real incident and accumulated superstition as the people involved retired. The first room 7 order appeared 3 nights later at 12:16 in the morning. The requisition printed at the emergency imaging desk while I was checking a trauma pelvis exposure for clipping. Portable chest, stat priority. Ordering provider listed as Dr. Lowell Bryce, which caught my attention because Lowell Bryce had not worked there in years. I knew the name from old radiology quality reports stored in the department drive. The location field said West Emergency Room 7. No age, no medical record number, just a temporary trauma identifier and a note that read repeat due to motion. I stared at it longer than I should have. Then I called the nursing supervisor as instructed. No answer. I called again. Still nothing. The emergency board was filling with heat emergency holds and ambulance arrivals. A respiratory therapist waved for me to bring the portable unit to a boarding patient who had pulled a line. Another order printed, then another. County Trauma did not leave stat imaging unaddressed because of a strange room number, especially on a night when software outages had already delayed half the lab results in the building. I told myself I was going to verify the location, nothing more. The west corridor sat beyond the current emergency pod, past an alcove with abandoned infusion pumps and a wall wrapped in temporary drywall that had been there so long it no longer looked temporary. At night, that part of the hospital always felt cooler. Maybe because facilities had closed vents to unused areas, or maybe because the hallway had fewer people to warm it. The overhead lights hummed with a faint, uneven buzz. My portable machine rolled badly on one front caster so I could hear my own approach in short rubber thumps. The current floor plan posted by the fire pull station showed rooms 1 through 6 on that side, then a trauma supply closet and an exit door. But halfway down the hall, on the painted block wall beneath layers of beige, I saw the shape of an older brass numeral where something had once been unscrewed. A vertical line and a curling edge. 7. The door itself was closed. No active patient monitor, no chart rack, no isolation sign. Just a laminated placard that said, "Storage." I should have turned back then. Instead, I knocked. A voice from inside said very clearly, "Repeat due to motion." It was not loud. It sounded close to the door, patient and tired. I opened it. The room beyond was larger than it should have been. That is not how I would have described it at the time. At the time, I told myself the proportions felt wrong because the portable light was failing and the corners were deeper in shadow than expected. There was a bed in the center, occupied. There were old wall suction canisters, a cracked oxygen flow meter, and a ceiling track where a privacy curtain might once have hung. The bed faced the door at a slight angle, as if someone had moved it for access and never returned it to standard position. The patient was covered to the sternum with a thin county blanket. I could not make out age or sex clearly. The face remained turned away. No nurse was present. No intravenous pumps. No wristband visible on the arm nearest me. Portable chest, I said, because procedure mattered and because saying something ordinary made the room easier to stand in. The figure did not move. I placed the detector behind the shoulders as best I could without dislodging whatever unseen lines might have been present. The skin at the back of the neck felt cool, not cold. I aligned the tube head, checked the angle, and asked for a breath hold out of habit. When no response came, I made the exposure. The image appeared on the monitor in the usual slow bloom of grayscale. At first, I thought I had double exposed the plate somehow. The thorax was there, but the anatomy was wrong in a way that resisted summary. Too many rib arcs on the left. A clavicle that seemed to split and reunite. The cardiac silhouette lay lower than expected, almost folded. Across the lungs ran faint rectangular bands, regular as floor tile grout. At the far margin of the film, just above the diaphragm, there was a shape like a doorway. I checked the patient again. The blanket now covered an empty bed. I wheeled the portable back so fast I clipped the door frame hard enough to jar the battery compartment loose. By the time I reached the main emergency hall, my scrub top was damp with sweat in spite of the air conditioning. At 6 in the morning, I searched the picture archiving system for the exam. The accession number still existed, but the image did not. In its place was a standard portable chest from room 12 on a heat stroke patient with bilateral patchy opacity, ordered by a different physician, performed at 12:18. Technologist initials, mine. I printed the audit trail. The system logged no deleted image, no room change, no accession reassignment, just a normal exam attached to a normal chart. When I took the printout to my lead technologist, he read it once, tore it neatly in half, and dropped both pieces in the confidential bin. "You do not keep paper on these," he said. I asked him what these were. He looked at my face a moment longer than he needed to. "Artifacts," he said. "Environmental. The detector picks up interference out there. Interference doesn't create rooms inside lungs." His expression tightened, not with surprise, but with fatigue. "Then do not image the room." That should have ended it. Instead, it made the problem procedural, and procedural problems invite investigation. Over the next week, I started checking the West Corridor whenever I passed between emergency and inpatient transport. During the day, the storage door was still there, scuffed and plain. At night, after midnight, the hallway seemed slightly longer. The angle at the end drifted by inches. A crash cart parked near the drywall one night would be against the opposite wall the next, though nobody claimed to have moved it. 2 different floor buffers left black crescent marks on tile that did not appear on the posted environmental services log. Then I began noticing small things about myself. The first was my badge photo. Security badges at County were terrible under the best conditions. Flat light, washed out skin, a camera mounted too high. But mine changed, not dramatically. The left side of the jaw looked smoother one morning, as if the picture had been taken before I needed stitches from a bicycle crash in college. My wife thought I was imagining it until she looked twice and asked when I had started wearing the older scrub color the department had retired 2 years earlier. I told her it had always been that photo. Even as I said it, I was no longer certain. The second thing was my reflection in leaded glass. Radiology doors have narrow windows darkened against scatter exposure. If you glance at them while moving, you catch yourself only in fragments. On a Thursday around 2 in the morning, I saw my own reflection in the West Corridor door to a linen alcove and stopped because the badge clipped to my chest was wrong. The number began with 84 instead of 86. I looked down. My actual badge said 8613. When I looked back up, the reflection had turned its head a fraction later than I had. I started checking old plans. Facilities kept archival blueprints in a basement office behind biomedical engineering. Most of the older paper maps were rolled in cracked cardboard tubes with dates stamped in fading ink. The emergency department had expanded in phases over 4 decades. In plans from the late 1970s, there was a West Trauma Annex with 8 treatment spaces and a dedicated portable imaging room. Room 7 sat at the end of the corridor exactly where the storage door stood now. In a set of revised plans from the early 1990s, the room was marked closed after structural remediation. The notation beside it was hard to read through a coffee stain, but I made out one phrase: "Do not restore to patient use." That night I asked Dana Whitlock what had happened there. She was hanging a liter of chilled saline on a heat injury patient whose core temperature still had not come down. Her face stayed composed. "You are not the first technologist to ask," she said. That room was part of the old trauma wing before the fire code remodel. There was a fire? Not exactly. She pressed the roller clamp open and watched the drip chamber fill. A bus rollover came in during a heat event. Multiple unidentified patients, imaging backlog, system downtime. Some of the charts were reconstructed later from handwritten notes. Things got assigned to the wrong beds. That still doesn't explain the room. No, she said, it explains the paperwork. Before I could ask more, the attending called her away. The next order from room 7 arrived on the hottest night of the month. The city grid had lost power in several neighborhoods, which meant generators were running in half the critical care units across Phoenix, and every emergency department bed was occupied. Ambulances lined up outside. We were using hallway stretchers, procedure chairs, anything with wheels and a side rail. At 1:15 in the morning, 4 room 7 requests printed in less than 10 minutes. Portable chest, portable abdomen, repeat chest. Line placement confirmation, different order times, same provider, Dr. Lowell Bryce. I should have shown them to a supervisor and stepped away. Instead, I took a clean detector, a spare battery, and the portable machine to the west corridor. The air grew colder with each turn of the wheel. Not cool from ventilation, cold like concrete after sunset. This time the storage sign was gone. The brass numeral 7 was visible on the door, polished as if many hands had touched it recently. Light showed under the threshold. When I entered, the room was occupied by more than one bed. That was the first impossible thing. Room 7 had never been large enough for a bay layout, yet I could see at least 3 gurneys in the half-dark, separated by hanging curtains that swayed without air movement. Monitors beeped at mismatched rates. Somewhere a suction canister rattled. The smell was antiseptic overlaid with something older, like dust heated for too many summers. I called out for nursing staff. No one answered. One bed nearest me held a patient with a non-rebreather mask and a county wristband turned inward. Another held only sheets, folded back as if someone had just risen from it. The third was screened by a curtain. On the counter by the sink sat a stack of trauma face sheets with no names. Only temporary identifiers written in heavy black marker. I decided to image the room itself. That thought came with the kind of calm I no longer trust. I propped the detector upright against an empty gurney, backed the portable unit away, widened the field, and centered on the beds and doorway instead of a body. It violated every rule of rational imaging. There was no order for it, no patient consent, no medical justification. But by then I understood the hospital's concern was not exposure. It was evidence. I made the exposure. The processing time felt longer than usual. Then the image resolved. It was not a room. It was a composite chest, or several chests overlaid across decades. Ribs of different sizes nested inside one another like misregistered transparencies. 18 clavicles. Dozens of vertebral shadows. At the center, where a mediastinum should have been, was the corridor outside the room, complete with the fire pool station and the faded wall map. Every bed in the room appeared as an opacity within lung fields, and clipped inside the left lower chest of the most prominent skeleton was a hospital badge. I knew the badge before I read the number. It was mine, except it was older. Different department color. Rounded edges from a previous badge style. The photo showed me younger, cleaner, less tired. Technologist, Nolan Price. Employee identification 8413. I did not understand what I was looking at until I noticed the date field burned faintly into the lower margin of the image. Not tonight's date, a date from 2 summers earlier. I ran. I left the portable machine in the corridor and locked myself in the staff restroom near Central Supply until my breathing slowed enough for me to think. At daybreak, I went straight to Human Resources before my shift officially ended. I asked for a reprint of my badge because the photo and number were wrong. The clerk behind the plexiglass asked what I meant. She turned her monitor toward me. My employee profile had my name, my start date, my certifications, my emergency contact, and a badge photo that was not the one I had worn for years. In the image, I looked older than I felt that morning, with more gray at the temples and a thin white scar under my chin that I did not yet have. The identification number was 8413. "You've had the same number since onboarding," the clerk said. "When was I hired?" She gave me a puzzled look. "After your emergency admission." I laughed because I thought she had mixed me up with someone else. She clicked the chart open. My stomach turned cold. Buried in the employment paperwork was a scanned emergency department face sheet from 2 summers earlier during the previous major heat emergency. Temporary trauma identifier, unidentified male, brought in from a bus rollover on the interstate. Portable chest pending, condition unstable, disposition line incomplete. Below it, added later in different handwriting, was a note. Transferred to imaging services per administrative directive. No discharge summary, no death note, no admission to any inpatient unit. Just the beginning of my employment file. I spent that day driving around Phoenix with the air conditioner on full, trying to reconstruct a history I had always assumed belonged to me. My wife recognized our house, our anniversary trips, my stories from school, all the ordinary shared details of a life. But when I showed her an old vacation picture on my phone, she said my smile looked unfamiliar. When I called my mother, she answered my questions carefully, like someone humoring a patient after anesthesia. She remembered everything I remembered. That was the worst part, the false history held under pressure. I went back the following night because by then I needed the room to deny me. The west corridor ended where the current floor plan said it should. No extra length, no brass numeral, only the storage door chained from the outside with a facilities lock and tagged for asbestos inspection. Security footage later showed me standing alone in front of that door at 1:12 in the morning, speaking to empty air, my portable detector tucked under one arm like a chart. The hospital never confronted me directly. They adjusted my schedule, pulled me from overnights for 2 weeks, reissued my badge without explanation. When I checked the new photo, it matched my face exactly, but I no longer believed matching meant anything. Dana Whitlock told me quietly that some rooms are not removed when hospitals renovate. They are only denied access to systems that make them legible. Old bed numbers disappear from floor plans. Orders reroute. Images are overwritten. Staff are moved, renamed, folded into other departments. Not because the room is empty, but because documentation gives shape to what would otherwise remain unstable. I still worked in emergency imaging after that. County hospitals do not pause because one technologist loses faith in architecture. But I stopped accepting any order that printed after midnight without a verified chart attached. And I never again trusted a clean floor plan or a familiar badge photo. Institutions like ours know how to erase what they cannot fix. The trick is not hiding the room. The trick is teaching everyone around it to keep updating the map. By then I had learned something else. Images do not always vanish. Sometimes they are only reassigned, filed under a different name, and left for another department to discover years later. Story 2. The Burned Negatives. When I held the film up to the cold archive light, I could still see the patient's lungs clearly enough to read the old scar tissue at the right apex. The burned part was lower down, where the identifier should have been. Name, date, military service number, accession stamp. All of it had been chemically blackened into a perfect rectangle, not by age or mishandling, but by intent. The patient stood alone in the image according to the paper jacket. Chest posteroanterior and lateral standard intake. Yet just behind his left shoulder, faint as breath on glass, there was another figure facing the cassette from inside the film. No anatomy I recognized, no density I could explain, only a silhouette where no one should have been. Then one of the overnight veterans passing the archive window stopped, looked straight at me and said, "You're back early this time." In 2008, I worked nights in the radiology archive basement of the Tucson Veterans Affairs Hospital. It was not the kind of job people pictured when they imagined hospital work. I did not draw blood, intubate patients, or sprint toward codes. I spent most shifts in a temperature-controlled room beneath radiology, converting old analog studies into digital storage so they could be preserved before the film degraded beyond use. The archive held decades of chest series, orthopedic follow-ups, fluoroscopy prints, and military transfer records from bases all over the Southwest. The work suited me because it was procedural and quiet. Weekend graveyard shifts were especially still. By 10 at night, most outpatient traffic was gone. The main reading rooms were dark, and the archive became a self-contained world of steel shelves, hanging film jackets, barcode scanners, and the dry metallic smell of old negatives. I logged accession numbers, checked chain of custody forms, cleaned dust from film with anti-static cloths, and fed studies into a digitizer that hummed low enough to disappear after an hour. If I heard anything at all, it was usually the building ventilation or the overhead announcement system testing itself between midnight and 1 in the morning. The basement archives had their own kinds of folklore, too. Staff joked that the film jackets multiplied when no one watched them. An orthopedic resident once swore he saw a handprint appear on an undeveloped fluoroscopy plate from the 1960s. None of that mattered. Most strange things in old archives came down to silver degradation, poor storage, or generations of people cutting corners with labeling. The batch that changed my mind arrived in 6 gray transfer tubs from off-site storage on a Friday afternoon in late August. The manifest identified them as military chest films slated for priority digitization because the source sleeves were showing nitrate damage. Most were routine: annual respiratory screens, preoperative films, follow-up chest series on older veterans with chronic lung disease. The jackets were yellowed but intact. The dates ranged from the late 1950s through the early 1980s. At around 11:30 that night, I opened the 3rd tub and found the first burned identifier. The blackened rectangle covered the name field with such precision it looked almost machine-made, though the film itself predated that kind of standardized redaction. The corresponding paper jacket was missing. Only the study number remained, handwritten in blue wax pencil at the corner. I assumed someone had tried to obscure personally identifying data for training use and done it badly. Then I found a second, then 5 more. By midnight, I had a stack of 12 chest films from different decades, all with their patient identifiers chemically burned away in the same exact location. I documented the anomaly on an archive variance form and called the weekend radiology supervisor upstairs. No answer. I left voicemail, logged the affected studies in the database, and continued working. It was during the scanning of the 4th film that I noticed the silhouette. Old chest films have a physical presence digital images lack. You can see emulsion defects, fingerprints, careless clipping, every mechanical detail of the exposure. The patient in that study had severe hyperinflation and a healed fracture of the 6th rib. Nothing unusual. But adjacent to the left scapula, partly superimposed over the lung field, there was a vertical opacity like the outline of a person standing just behind him. I checked for double exposure. None. I checked edge fogging. None. I ran the film again. Same opacity. The lateral view showed it too, thinner this time, almost threaded behind the sternum. By 2 in the morning, I had identified 9 films with the same phenomenon. Different patients, different decades, different institutions before transfer into the VA system. In every one, the burned identifier was present and the shadow stood beside the patient, never touching, always just behind the left shoulder. The intake paperwork on the few surviving jackets consistently stated that the patient had been imaged alone. I went upstairs to pull related admission logs from records. The Tucson VA at night had a particular feeling to it. Not frightening exactly, just older than its surface. Long corridors, polished tile, bulletin boards with outdated notices curling behind thumbtacks. The inpatient floors carried the mixed smell of floor wax, cafeteria coffee, and the medicated sweetness of respiratory wards. Some of the men awake that late sat in wheelchairs near the nurses' stations because sleep came badly to them. Others walked laps, hands clasped behind their backs as if still inspecting something only they understood. As I crossed the long hall outside pulmonary rehab, a veteran seated near the vending machines lifted his head and stared at me with a focus that felt immediate and personal. "You were in records before," he said. I slowed. "No, sir. I work archives downstairs." He smiled without warmth. "Not this year." I assumed confusion, dementia, maybe a medication effect. It happened often enough. I wished him a good night and kept walking. By the time I returned with the admission binders, 2 more patients had greeted me as if we had already spoken. One called me Lieutenant. Another asked whether I had found the films yet. Both men's charts later showed no cognitive impairment. The admission logs were incomplete in the way bureaucratic things become incomplete when enough years pass and no one imagines anyone will need consistency. Handwritten intakes from transferred military facilities, microfilm discharge summaries, duplicate indexes with conflicting spellings. But the burned studies all shared one feature. Somewhere in the corresponding paperwork, if you dug deep enough, there was a note about an accompanying observer. Sometimes a corpsman, sometimes a transport aide, sometimes simply staff present. Yet the official imaging record still listed the patient as alone. I began staying late after my shift to compare the digitized archive against the live radiology database. That was when the record started changing. On Sunday morning, I scanned a 2001 chest film under the name Arthur Keene. Clean metadata after digitization, study attached properly. By Sunday night, the exact image had moved in the database to a patient named Roland Tier. Different birth year, different branch of service, same film, same hyperinflation pattern, same shadow figure behind the left shoulder. Monday morning, it was gone entirely. Tuesday night, it returned attached to a 1974 inpatient respiratory workup under a third name. At first, I blamed data migration errors. The hospital was moving several legacy systems at once, and I knew enough about health record transitions to expect temporary chaos. But the physical jackets changed too. Paper labels peeled and reappeared. Pencil annotations I had written at 3 in the morning vanished by dawn. A binder I used for discrepancy logs showed entries in my own handwriting that I did not remember making. Notes about burned negatives from 6 months earlier. A maintenance request for a digitizer lamp replacement I had only discovered that week. The more I worked those films, the more familiar the patients became, though I had never met most of them. One chest series from the late 1960s showed a young man with shrapnel near the clavicle. I knew before opening the jacket that he had a smoker's laugh and tremor in the right hand. When I finally checked the later chart, there it was in the clinic note from decades after the study. Another patient with a median sternotomy scar felt so familiar that I spoke his name out loud before I saw it. Except when I checked the next morning, the name had changed. I stopped sleeping well. I would wake near noon with film images still impressed behind my eyelids, not the patients themselves, but that accompanying figure, always standing close without ever resolving into detail. More than once I dreamed the archive light box was a doorway and the negatives hanging on it were windows into rooms where someone waited just beyond the field of view. The fear was not dramatic. It was clerical. The sense that if I mislabeled one thing, the whole system would quietly decide I had never understood my own job. The chief radiologist, Dr. Warren Bell, came to the archive Tuesday afternoon after I pushed the issue through 3 levels of administration. He was a thin man with careful diction, and the permanently tired eyes of someone who had spent years reading chest films under fluorescent light. I showed him the burned identifiers and the shadow figures. He examined 6 studies in silence. "These are not shadows," he said finally. "They're handling artifacts, static, pressure damage, duplication. Old film does this." "Then why are the identifiers burned off?" "Privacy redaction." "On analog originals from multiple decades?" He placed the last film back in its sleeve with more care than the explanation deserved. "Some material in this archive came from military facilities under conditions we did not control. That does not explain the database changes." He looked at me for a long moment. "You are working nights alone too often," he said. "Archive work can distort perspective. Keep to the manifest. Do not cross-reference outside assigned batches." He never answered my actual question. After he left, I checked his signature on an old quality assurance memo clipped to the inside of a binder. The memo was dated 3 years before he had supposedly started at the hospital. That was when I began pulling microfilm. The hospital stored older records on reels in a side room near medical records, where the air always smelled faintly of vinegar and machine oil. You had to feed the reels through a glass platen and crank through images that flashed by in blurred black frames until a page caught. It was slow, physical work, which made it harder to explain away what I found. Across 4 different decades, I located repeated references to unidentified presence on radiographic studies, never in official report language, always in side notes, variance logs, or handwritten comments never meant for broad review. Figure present again on intake film, repeat under supervision. Burn identifying band before transfer. Archive separately. One note from the mid-1970s, signed only with initials, said, "It uses the patient list until someone notices." I copied everything by hand because I no longer trusted the printers. Around 1 in the morning on the following Saturday, while the digitizer ran a high-resolution pass on another damaged chest film, the man from the vending area appeared at the archive door. He was wearing hospital pajamas under a cardigan and carried his telemetry box in one hand. "I told them not to put you down here again," he said. I stood up too quickly and knocked a stack of sleeves sideways. "Do I know you?" He looked past me to the light box where the latest chest film hung drying after a static clean pass. His mouth tightened. "No," he said. "But I knew the last name they gave you." He stepped closer than visitors were supposed to come. Up close, I could see the green hospital wristband, the thin scars on his neck, the desert leather quality of his skin. "They cycle staff when the films start matching. Keeps the archive clean. Different clerk, same face in the negatives. Saves paperwork." I asked who they were. He gave a tired little shrug. "Same people who burn the names. Same people who need the studies to belong to somebody." I went to call security. By the time I reached the hallway, he was gone. Telemetry had no patient by his room number. The nurse's station told me that bed had been empty since the afternoon. I should have left the job then. Instead, I went back downstairs and checked the light box. The film hanging there was a portable chest from 1981. The patient's identifier had been burned away. Behind the left shoulder stood the usual figure, only this time the silhouette held detail, not full detail. Enough. A man in archive scrubs. Badge clipped at chest height. Head tilted slightly forward the way mine always was when reading accession numbers. I took the film jacket to the desk and found my own handwriting inside it. Not recent handwriting. Older, tighter. The note on the inner flap read, "If this has returned to me, the redaction failed. Do not trust recognition. They will know you from before you know them." I do not remember writing it. The remaining days in that job moved strangely. Staff greeted me by names that were not mine, then forgot the interaction completely. Database records drifted overnight and settled by morning into internally consistent lies. Burned films migrated in and out of assigned tubs as if the archive itself were reshelving them after I went home. Once I found a digitized image time-stamped 6 months in the future with my employee login attached. Once I found a payroll correction listing me as deceased and reactivated in the same quarter. The final discovery came from the oldest reel of microfilm, mislabeled pulmonary follow-up but actually containing military transfer intakes from a decommissioned facility outside Tucson. On a page dated decades before I was born, a clerk had clipped a contact print of an admission chest film for internal reference. The patient stood alone. The shadow figure behind the left shoulder was clearer than in later studies. He was facing the camera. It was me, or a version of me with older eyes and a different haircut, wearing a hospital badge from a design the VA stopped issuing before I started there. Below the image in manual typewriter text was a line I read so many times it lost meaning. Escort not visible to patient. Present on all successful intakes. Reassign if recognized. I turned in my notice the next morning. Human Resources said they were sorry to lose someone with my tenure. My tenure had been 11 months. Their file said 7 years. I left Tucson soon after and have not worked analog archives since. Digital systems are not safer, but they are easier to pretend with. Film has a body. It holds tampering in its emulsion and remembers the pressure of hands. What frightens me now is not the thought that something stood beside those veterans during imaging. It is the quieter possibility that the hospital had long ago stopped asking what the figure was and settled instead on a manageable workflow. Burn the names, move the studies. Wait for the clerk to notice, then file him somewhere else under a cleaner decade. Later, when I heard from a former co-worker in northern Arizona about strange audio on overnight brain scans, I believed her immediately. Once a machine begins keeping the wrong parts of a person, the rest of the system adjusts around it. Story 3. Static in MRY-3. At around 3 in the morning, the scanner started speaking in voices that did not belong to the patient inside it. Not words at first. Breathing, then a whisper of movement, then the clipped cadence of a woman reciting room numbers as if reading directions in the dark. My headset channel was locked to Scanner 3 only. Scanner 2 sat powered down for the storm, and the recovery bay held a single sedated research subject under pulse oximetry. Yet through the intercom I heard 3 separate sets of footsteps on concrete and someone saying very calmly, "Turn left where the wall should end." When I checked the real hallway outside the magnet room, fresh wet prints from snow tracked down toward the underground maintenance tunnel that no patient had access to. The clinic outside Flagstaff was formerly called the Coconino Neurological Imaging Annex, though most of us shortened it to the Annex and left it there. It was a research-affiliated outpatient facility attached by funding rather than architecture to a larger medical system in town. We handled complex magnetic resonance imaging studies, research protocols on sleep and memory, and after-hours neurological scans that the main hospital preferred not to tie up a machine with. The building sat on a rise at the edge of the Pine Line, low and modern from the outside, with 3 magnet suites below grade and a first floor of consult rooms and offices that always smelled faintly of coffee and printer toner. I was the overnight magnetic resonance imaging technologist for Friday through Monday, which meant I monitored late protocols, screened add-on patients, coordinated sedation cases with the on-call physician, and made sure nobody carried ferromagnetic stupidity into a room that housed a magnet powerful enough to turn negligence into a projectile. In winter, the job took on a custodial element. Snow complicated everything. Staff called out, roads closed, deliveries stalled. The building took on the sealed quality of a ship. The blizzard that weekend had arrived earlier than forecast, hard and dry off the mountain. By 11 at night, the parking lot was buried past the painted curbs, and the main highway had already posted closures farther north. The day technologist left after helping me settle the first sedation patient and made a joke about my enjoying the peace. The clinic administrator decided to postpone Saturday morning outpatients and authorized skeleton staffing only. By midnight, I was effectively alone in the building except for one recovery nurse sleeping in a recliner between checks. Our overnight list included 3 research participants enrolled in a memory consolidation study. They received light sedation for prolonged scans because motion ruined the data, and because the protocol required repeated functional runs well past the point where ordinary patients grew claustrophobic or impatient. The study was respectable on paper. Sleep architecture, stimulus recall, spatial processing. Nothing occult about it. The patients were healthy adults with clean screenings, no implants, no contraindications. My work was technical. Position the head coil. Confirm hearing protection, establish communication, monitor oxygen saturation and pulse. Run the sequences exactly as prescribed, transfer images to the reading server. The first anomaly came from the audio channel. Magnetic resonance imaging scanners are never quiet. Even people who have never been near one know the industrial percussion of gradients cycling on and off. Thumps, knocks, mechanical buzzing, sudden hammering that feels too violent for a diagnostic tool. Patients wear headphones or earplugs because otherwise the noise becomes the experience. Communication headsets let us reassure them between sequences. At 12:45, I was midway through a structural sequence on the first subject in Scanner 3 when static bled into the intercom. Not radio static exactly. More like cloth dragged across a microphone followed by a faint layered whisper. I assumed a cable issue. I paused between sequences, asked the patient to remain still, checked the audio line, and resumed. The static returned, this time behind the normal scanner acoustics. When the patient came out 40 minutes later, he looked pale but composed. Sedation can leave people disoriented, so I asked routine recovery questions. Name? Date of birth? Where are you now? He answered the first 2 correctly. At the third question, he hesitated. In the lower hall, he said. I told him he was in the annex recovery bay. He frowned. No, before that, the one with the locked utility doors. Did you dream during the scan? He gave me a slow look. You told me to keep walking until I reached the red line. I had said nothing of the kind. I noted probable sedation dream content in the chart and moved on. The second subject described the same place. Different age, different background, no contact with the first participant. Yet as she emerged from Scanner 3 around 2 in the morning, still groggy and blinking against the recovery lights, she asked whether construction was happening downstairs. What construction? In the tunnel, she said. The concrete one with the old exit signs. I kept hearing you on the speaker telling us not to open the last door. Us. I checked the study room doors, the corridor outside magnet control, even the maintenance access down the service hall that facilities use to reach chilled water lines and cable conduits. Everything was locked. No one had entered the building since midnight, according to the front desk monitor. Snow pressed white against the glass panels at ground level. The parking lot lights were already halos in the storm. I called the research physician attached to the protocol, Dr. Elise Rourke, at home. She sounded annoyed but awake. Sedation-associated dream convergence is not impossible, she said. They all completed the same pre-scan cognitive tasks. They described a real hallway. People manufacture specifics after the fact. That is why we document and do not dramatize. Then she told me to proceed with the final participant unless vital signs suggested otherwise. I proceeded because that is what technicians do. The machine schedule outranks intuition until intuition can be entered into a formal variance report. The third subject was a graduate student from Tempe, healthy, calm, and profoundly difficult to position because she kept lifting her chin when I centered the coil. We got her settled, ran the initial localizer, and started the protocol. During the first resting state sequence, the software clock on the control console advanced 7 minutes in under 2. I watched it happen. 2:15 became 2:22 while the wall clock above the desk still read 2:16. I stopped the run, checked the workstation sync, and restarted the sequence. This time, the software lagged behind by 4 minutes. Then the images began to corrupt. Brain scans fail in recognizable ways. Motion ghosting, susceptibility artifact, signal dropout from dental work or hair products. Machine calibration problems. These I understood. What appeared in the structural series from Scanner 3 was different. Nested within the expected anatomy, faint but repeatable across slices, was a linear arrangement of hollow spaces running inferior to superior through the head in impossible geometry. They were not vessels, not ventricles, not anything a neuroradiologist would call anatomy. They resembled corridors. I ran the sequence again with adjusted parameters. The corridors remained. Halfway through the repeat, the static on the headset sharpened into speech. "Third door on the right," a woman's voice said. "Do not let Mara go first." Mara was my name. I yanked the headset off so hard it caught in my hair. The patient in the bore had not moved. Her oxygen saturation remained stable. The recovery nurse, when I called for her, said she had heard nothing over the hall speaker. Snow finally cut the outside line around 3. The internet backup held, but the road cameras dropped and the administrator texted that county plows were suspending service until daylight. We were snowed in until morning at minimum. I checked the emergency supplies, verified the generator transfer status, and made coffee I did not want. Every ordinary task helped for about 30 seconds. When the final patient came out of Scanner 3, she was crying quietly, not from panic, but from the exhausted distress of someone returning.